They continued to take gold until 1945, when the Germans had more or less lost the war.
After the war, much of the gold that was stolen by the Nazis was found, but there's still millions of dollars of gold missing, and that's the focus of our investigation.
For decades, people believed the last secrets of World War II had already been uncovered. Then, a hidden wartime vault, long thought lost, resurfaced in a place no one expected. What was found inside was not valuable in the usual sense, but it was deeply unsettling, horrific even. If this was meant to disappear forever, the question is simple. Why was it hidden here? And what were they so desperate to erase? A lake designed to hide secrets. Lake Toplitz does not look dangerous at first. The water sits still between steep mountain walls, with trees crowding the shore. On calm days, the surface looks clean and bright, like any other cold lake in the Alps. People have fished nearby, and hikers pass through the area, but nothing about it warns you to stay back. But this lake was never an easy place to reach. It sits deep in the Salzkammergut Mountains, far from large towns and main roads. Even today, the drive is slow and narrow, but in 1945, it was way worse. There were fewer roads and definitely fewer eyes. This particular detail was important in the last days of the war, when the wrong person seeing the wrong thing could change lives. And not really in a good way. The lake itself is long and narrow, cut into the rock by ice long before people lived there. Its sides drop straight down, and once something goes in, it hardly ever comes back out. All year round, the water is cold, and it doesn't mix like most other lakes do. And below the surface, the lake is as hostile as they come. While the upper water holds air, beneath it does not, which means things that sink do not rot the way they normally would. There are also layers and layers of trees trapped under the water, stacked and tangled in a way that restricts movement and shifts when touched. People around the area knew the lake was dangerous long before the war ended, and that reputation made it useful. For in the final weeks of World War II, when evidence became a liability, Lake Toplitz was chosen because it was the perfect place to stash these hard secrets. And soon, under cover of night, trucks began to arrive, the night the crates went in. By the time the war was ending in the spring of 1945, Germany was already losing control of almost everything. Cities were falling, records were being destroyed, and people who had once acted with full authority were suddenly thinking about what might happen next. In moments like that, it becomes very problematic to have evidence lying around. Sure, paper can be burned, but some things cannot be destroyed so easily, like heavy objects, metal tools, and large batches of material meant to leave no trace. Fortunately, Lake Toplitz existed and was the perfect place to store this evidence. We know for sure that crates were dumped into the lake around this time, because years later, people pulled items out of the water that could only have been placed there on purpose. But what exactly happened that night became a subject of speculation, since there were no records detailing the whole thing. Some eyewitness accounts began to fly, and people swore that trucks came through the area close to the end of the war, which kind of makes sense. After all, trucks were still used, even when fuel was low. Some people also said that this happened at night, which again makes sense. Night hides movement and keeps all the unsavory questions away. If you wanted to move something without alerting the whole neighborhood, night was the perfect time to do so. The crates themselves were described as wooden and sealed. They were heavy enough to need several people to move them, and there is no record of anyone opening them at the site. The goal was not inspection, but removal, and once the boxes were pushed into the water, they sank quickly and disappeared beneath the surface. People have long wondered who organized this operation. While no document names the individuals involved, the materials dumped came from a secret program controlled by the SS. That connection is clear from what was later recovered. Even if we cannot say who stood by the lake that night, we can say the decision came from high authority. After the war ended, the trail went cold. There were no transport lists explaining the move, and no reports describing the dumping. If such records ever existed, they were destroyed or lost. The people who could have explained it with certainty were gone or never questioned, and that absence of answers only allowed rumors to grow. Many believed the crates held gold stolen during the war, while some others thought weapons were hidden there, things that were too risky to leave behind. There were also claims about documents that could damage powerful people if they ever surfaced. Of course, none of these stories were proven, but they spread because there was no information stating otherwise. The lake offered no help. It was dangerous and already known for taking lives, so whatever had been thrown into it stayed out of reach. And for years, the mystery remained so, a mystery. Then someone finally decided to challenge the lake and find out what had really been sunk that night. The first descent and the wrong discovery. By the late 1950s, interest in Lake Toplitz had still not faded. Stories about wartime dumping were still being repeated, but no one had solid proof. The problem was that the lake was too dangerous for most divers, and past attempts had ended in failure or death. Still, curiosity did not stop. In 1959, a German magazine named Stern decided to support a proper search. This was not a treasure hunt, but a controlled attempt to confirm whether anything from the war was actually in the lake. Professional divers were hired, and the plan focused on safety. No one believed the deepest part of the lake could be reached, so the aim was to search areas that were difficult, but still possible. The divers went down slowly, and even so, conditions changed fast as they descended. Light dropped, and movement became harder. Before long, they reached the layer of sunken trees that blocked deeper access. The logs were packed tightly and moved when touched. Going beyond them was too risky, so the search stayed above that point. Even so, the divers found something. Wooden crates were resting on the lake floor. Some were damaged, but others were still solid enough to lift. Bringing them up took time and care, but a number of crates reached the surface. When they were opened, the results were quite a surprise to everyone. Inside were British banknotes. For years, people had talked about gold, so the sight of money seemed to support those rumors. But experts quickly noticed something was off. The notes looked right at first glance, but closer checks showed they were not genuine. They were counterfeit. This discovery raised new questions. Fake money had no real value, so why hide it in such a dangerous place? Why move it into the mountains instead of destroying it? And why make such high-quality forgeries if they were only going to be dumped? The divers could not go back down to look for more answers. The fog layer made further exploration too dangerous, and the lake had already proven it was not forgiving. The expedition ended without reaching the deepest areas. Still, the search changed everything. The lake was no longer just linked to rumors and guesses. The recovered notes showed that a large counterfeiting effort existed and that someone had gone to great trouble to erase its traces. Lake Toplitz had not been used to hide treasure, but proof. The discovery solved one question, but opened many more. Because now people knew something had been made, and made carefully, long before it was thrown into the lake. Operation Bernhard. The fake banknotes pulled from Lake Toplitz did not come from small-time criminals or random forgers. They were part of a large plan created by the Nazi state itself. Once experts studied the notes more closely, it became clear that this was not a side project or a rushed effort. It was organized, well-funded, and carefully controlled. The plan had a name, and it was Operation Bernhard. The idea behind it was simple. Even if the execution was not, the Nazis wanted to weaken Britain by attacking its money. If huge amounts of fake British pounds entered circulation, people would lose trust in the currency, banks would struggle, and trade would slow. At the same time, the fake money could be used to pay spies, buy supplies, and fund secret operations across Europe without using real German funds. To make this work, the forgeries had to be almost perfect. That meant the Nazis needed skilled workers. They needed people who understood printing, engraving, paper quality, and fine detail. Instead of hiring experts, they turned to prisoners. Jewish prisoners with the right skills were taken from different camps and moved to Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin. There, they were placed in a separate area, cut off from the rest of the camp. Their situation was brutal, even if it looked better on the surface. They were given more food and better living conditions than other prisoners, but this was not kindness. Far from it. Their lives depended on the quality of their work, so if the notes failed inspection, punishment followed. If the work stopped, they knew they would likely be killed. Under this pressure, the prisoners succeeded. They recreated British banknotes in incredible detail. The paper felt right. At the time, The Rifleman aired in the same television climate as The Untouchables, another series frequently criticized for its blunt depictions of crime and gunplay, and even security features that were meant to stop copying were carefully reproduced. British experts later admitted that many of the forged notes were almost impossible to tell apart from real ones. Over time, millions of pounds were printed. Some of this money was used during the war. Nazi agents used it in neutral countries to buy information, pay contacts, and move around freely. The plan to fully collapse the British economy never worked as intended, but the operation itself was still one of the largest counterfeiting efforts in history. As the war began to end, Operation Bernhard became a problem for the people who ran it. The notes were proof of a serious crime, the printing plates and the machines were proof, and the prisoners were witnesses. But unfortunately, burning everything was not realistic. The amount of material was too large and time was running out. Leaving it behind was also dangerous because Allied forces were closing in. The solution was to remove it all and hide it somewhere difficult to reach. That is why the material was loaded onto trucks and taken away, some of which ended up in Lake Toplitz. The fake notes found in 1959 were only part of what had been dumped. Later searches recovered printing plates and other tools used to make the forgeries. These items confirmed what historians already suspected. The lake had been used to erase the physical evidence of Operation Bernhard. The human cost of the operation is harder to measure. Many of the prisoners who worked on the forgeries were killed before the war ended. A smaller number survived and later spoke about what they had been forced to do. Their stories made one thing clear: Operation Bernhard was more than just producing fake money. It was about using human lives as tools and discarding them when they were no longer useful. Lake Toplitz preserved the objects tied to that crime long after the people involved were gone. And by doing so, it made sure the story could not disappear completely. What machines found that humans couldn't? For many years, the biggest problem with Lake Toplitz was not a lack of interest to explore the depths, but access. Divers could only go so far before the water became unsafe. Beyond a certain point, the risks were too high, and the chances of coming back were too low. That meant most of the lake floor stayed out of reach, no matter how many questions people had. This started to change once machines became good enough to do the job instead. By the late 90s and early 2000s, researchers had access to remotely operated vehicles, often called ROVs. These were small machines fitted with cameras and lights, lowered into the water on cables and controlled from the surface. They did not need air, and they were not affected by panic or exhaustion. If something went wrong, no human life was at risk. With permission from Austrian authorities, researchers began using these machines to explore parts of the lake that had never been properly examined before. The machines were lowered slowly, guided carefully, and stopped often so the cameras could capture clear images. And for the first time, large sections of the lake floor came into view. What the cameras showed surprised people who thought the dumping had been quick or careless. Objects were spread out across the lake bed rather than piled in one place. This suggested that items had been dumped over time, not all at once. It also suggested careful planning. Someone had wanted to make sure the objects sank and stayed down. Some containers were broken open, likely damaged as they hit the bottom or shifted over the years. Others were still closed. Metal objects could be seen lying partly buried in the lake floor. Their shapes were clear enough that experts could identify what they were used for. Among the items visible were tools linked to the counterfeiting work. These were not loose scraps or damaged leftovers, as one would imagine. They were proper pieces of equipment. Their presence confirmed that the lake had been used to hide not just the finished products, but also how those products were made. The machines also revealed something that earlier searches had missed, and that is the fact that the lake floor is not flat. It dips and rises in ways that hide objects from view unless you are directly above them. This meant that earlier dives may have passed close to important items without ever seeing them. In some areas, the log layer still blocked access. Even machines could not pass through certain tight spaces. Cameras could only look from above or from the side, meaning that some objects could be seen but not reached, and others could not be seen at all. Because of this, researchers were careful about what they claimed. The footage showed clear evidence of dumping, but it did not show everything. Large sections of the lake remain unexplored to this day. Another limitation to the work was the law. Lake Toplitz is protected, and not everything that is found can be removed. Each item has to be documented, studied, and approved before it can be brought to the surface. This slows the process, but it also prevents damage and careless handling. And although there are still parts of the lake still left unexplored, at least these machine-led searches really changed people's understanding. Before, people argued about whether the lake held anything important at all. But after the footage, that question was settled. It's been made open that the lake had indeed been used as a storage site for evidence that someone or many someones wanted gone. At the same time, the machines showed how much was still unknown. Cameras can only show what they reach. Anything beyond that remains untouched. What may still be down there? By the time people had seen enough of Lake Toplitz to understand how it had been used, the focus slowly moved from what had already been found to what might still be down there. The lake had given up important pieces of the story, but it had also made it clear that not everything had been reached. Some areas were simply too hard to access, even with modern equipment, and that left space for questions to linger. Naturally, people started wondering. One of the most common ideas is that other valuable items were dumped into the lake during the final days of the war, possibly things that were never meant to be seen again. Gold is the story that comes up most often, usually tied to the looting that happened across Europe. It is easy to see why that idea stuck. The lake was remote, dangerous, and already known to swallow anything dropped into it. If someone wanted to hide something valuable, this would have been a tempting place. At the same time, nothing pulled from the lake so far has confirmed that story, which is why it remains just that, a story. Another idea people often bring up is documents. The Nazis were known for keeping detailed records, and as the war collapsed, destroying those records became a priority. Some people believe that files too risky to burn or too urgent to deal with may have been sealed up and dumped instead. The cold, low-air water of the lake makes this idea sound possible, especially when you consider how well other items survived underwater. Whether such documents are actually there is another matter, and for now it remains an open question. Over the years, the world has seen countless wars and wartime sites, but what makes Lake Toplitz different from many others is that it still feels somehow unfinished. It is not a cleared ruin or a fully explored wreck, but a place where parts of the story have been brought to light, while others remain hidden simply because reaching them is so difficult. That unfinished feeling keeps people interested and keeps the debate alive. Tell us, what are your thoughts on this? What else do you think was thrown into that water when no one was watching? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.